We will now move to our technical session, where leading innovators and experts will share insights into emerging agri-tech technologies shaping the future of agriculture. It gives me great privilege to invite our first speaker, Mr. Sarang Nerkar, founder and CEO of InnoSapien Agrotechnologies. Mr. Nerkar is a deep tech entrepreneur working at the intersection of artificial intelligence, remote sensing, and climate smart agriculture. His company develops digital platforms for soil analysis, farm management, and advisory services that support thousands of farmers. He has represented India at global platforms including the United Nations Science Summit and World Expo. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I request all of you all to kindly take your seats so that we can begin with our speaker session. And of course, we are all self actualized people here. So I don't think I should reiterate that we keep our mobiles on silent mode. Having said that, may I invite Mr. Sarang Nerkar to deliver his presentation on advancing agri-tech through remote sensing innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Nerkar.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sarang Nerkar, and I'm the founder of InnoSapien Agrotechnologies. And today I'll be talking about advancing agri-tech remote sensing innovation. And I won't be talking about remote sensing in the traditional sense. Of course, I'll talk about what remote sensing is, what are the different kinds of remote sensing. But I always like to do such talks in a different way where I try to share my experience more than what the technology is. Because about the technology, you'll be able to find on Google, but my experience is something unique to share. So I'd like to share my experience with you all. And also, show some of our work and maybe get some suggestions from you all on how we can be doing our work even better. For starters, I'd love to thank the Maratha Chamber of Commerce for inviting me over here today, and the support of Sarangi sir, under whose leadership this conference is taking place today. The reason for hosting this conference even is the fact that agriculture is an extremely complex topic, a topic that has variability all over the place. When you try to cultivate something, the soil that you pick, or rather the soil that you have on which you'd be cultivating, is variable. The variety that you plant or the species that you plant in your farm is variable. And there is, by saying variable, I don't mean one or two, there's tons of options available over there. These are variabilities that are still within our control. Beyond that, the esteemed speakers before me have mentioned climate change as a major issue, because that is something that is adding extreme amounts of variability for farming. And due to all of this variability, agriculture is actually an information problem. That's how I like to look at it. The more information I have about the farm, the more my intelligence would be, and the better I'd be able to produce. Or rather, I should say, my hope would be to produce as good as possible, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with nature over here. And nature, in an innate form, is extremely variable. On the screen, I've shown a few kinds of variabilities and the decisions that farmers have to take basis that, such as irrigation, nutrients, pest management, harvest timing, even what crop they want to cultivate, what variety, which market. It's an end-to-end spectrum on which farmers have to constantly make decisions. And so far, a lot of these decisions have been made with the lack of significant information. We like to think about agriculture from a systems point of view when we talk in such conferences. But on the ground level, there is lack of information, let alone about the technology. There is lack of information about their own farm, due to which there is a lot of guesswork or a lot of standard practices that are followed across the board. With the help of technology, we can change that by getting more information, more data about the farms, and basis that making intelligent decisions. And that's what technology is all about, being able to make intelligent decisions in this data intensive world. Also, I'm speaking in English, but I will also be transitioning to Marathi on and off. मी मराठीच आहे. तर बोलताना मी काही गोष्टी मराठीत बोलेल कारण की दोज आर बेस्ट एक्सप्रेस्ड इन मराठी आय फील बट by and large I'll be doing the presentation in English. I hope everybody is comfortable with that. With all of this variability and lack of information in agriculture, it's not like we haven't, as human beings, it's not like we haven't tried to change that. We've got our processes of getting information from the ground and making certain intelligent decisions. We do visual crop inspection, we do lab-based testing, visual crop inspection through organizations such as KVK, and lab testing again through KVK's various independent labs. But the issue over there is that there's a lack of spatial coverage. I can, if I'm a progressive farmer, I can get my farm tested. But across the board, scalability is a major issue because you're picking a sample individually from a farm. So how many farms can we go to? Because these labs are time consuming and they also cost a lot of money. And due to this, there is delayed advisories, or a lot of the times we think about package of practice. We have a standard way of cultivating, and that is what we try to follow. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that with technology, we are able to change that standard process into one that dynamically adapts to the conditions that are there in the farm. And that is the crux of using technology over there, being able to make decisions dynamically as opposed to a fixed package of practice that is given to us. And basis that, one of the solutions that comes up quite a lot is remote sensing. Before we, my session is also on remote sensing, and like I mentioned, my take is slightly different, slightly unique from that. What does remote sensing literally mean? Sensing something remotely, meaning you sense something at a distance without touching it. So that is completely non-invasive. And because of that, we have the opportunity of doing things at scale. We can monitor vegetation health, we can monitor crop growth, we can monitor soil moisture, land use changes, what is the carbon sequestration or what is the emission from that particular farm. All of these things can be sensed without having to actually touch the plant or be close to the plant. And that is the key benefit of remote sensing. And it's not a new thing. Remote sensing has existed for a while. I mean, when you think about the first cameras that were developed or the first audio sensors that were developed, I would also like you to think about remote sensing not just from a visual perspective. When we typically say remote sensing, the first thing that comes to our mind is satellite imagery and geographic information systems, GIS. And you see a lot of dashboards related to that. But my take on remote sensing is that if I'm remotely sensing a particular thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the visual domain. It can be in the audio domain as well. And there are new experiments that are coming up. I'll be talking about how we are trying to do that. And at the same time, it is not just satellite imagery. Point दूर से देखना है, तो मैं सैटेलाइट के दूरी से देखूं या एक ड्रोन के दूरी से देखूं या मेरे सामने ये जो लैपटॉप है, I can sense it, for example, with the help of my phone's camera without touching it. So that also, in a way, is a kind of remote sensing. And the reason for explaining these different kinds of remote sensing is important, especially in the Indian context, because of a few things that were mentioned earlier, actually. One is fragmented farms, right? Being able to, when you look at satellite imagery, you get very low resolution. That means in one pixel, you're able, or rather in one small box, if you were to isolate a box 10 by 10, you would get less information about a particular farm. Same thing if I go to a drone, I'd get a lot more information. And the same thing with the handheld device, I can actually go up and close and get more information about individual leaves, individual berries, individual, branches, all at a very microscopic level. So one has to really think about remote sensing from a different perspective given our context. That being said, it's not like satellite imagery is not applicable to our region. It is definitely applicable, but there's lack of data over there as well. Anyone who works in the remote sensing domain or has used any remote sensing tools or has looked into satellite imagery would know that we don't have great temporal frequency in satellite imaging. We get the Sentinel and Landsat data, which is the commonly available data. That a lot of the demos that you will see these days are based on that data. But how often do we get that data? We get that data once in every 2 weeks. Is that absolutely useful to us? The resolution at which we get it, is that you know useful at a individual farm level, especially when the farm is fragmented. माझे जे काही शेतकरी प्रोजेक्टमध्ये असतात, they have small farms, 10 guntas, 20 guntas. Is satellite imagery actually useful for 10 gunta plot? Probably not. So one has to think, well, how do I get closer? You then try to use drones. And if I try to get even closer, is something that we have been working on, and I'll be sharing that shortly. But what is this remote sensing? Sense karna hai, matlab kya karna hai? When we look at the light that comes from the sun, or when we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, there is a particular component of it which is visual, which is what we all see, right? The colors, Vibgyor, violet, indigo, green, red, all the way till blue. You are trying to look at something that's visible to the naked eye. But that's not where the electromagnetic spectrum stops. There's also infrared, things that are not visible to our eye. Same with ultraviolet, things that are not visible to our eye. And the way to think about this is the way in which we looked at our own bodies. We too are a living organism. And to look at our issues, we have come up with mechanisms such as doing X-ray scans, CT scans, MRI. This all uses different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that are not visible to our naked eye, but give us great insights on our human body. Similarly, maybe not to the extent of doing a X-ray scan or a CT scan, but we can utilize different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum to which plants react differently and give us insights that would not be visible to our naked eye. That's the crux of image-based remote sensing. And like I've mentioned over here, healthy plants reflect that light or that energy in a different way when compared to diseased plants or plants under stress. And if we are able to see these stresses early on, we'd be able to make decisions early on. And we'd be able to make decisions that are otherwise inaccessible to us. And in that, there are various indices like NDVI and various other indices. And these things have existed for decades. So there's no need for explaining. I'm assuming the crowd over here is already aware about the concept of remote sensing. Now, what does remote sensing give you? It just gives you sensing. I just get an image with pixels in it. And I still need a scientist or someone who is knowledgeable to decode that information. Pixel में लाल दिख रहा है तो उसका मतलब क्या है? Unless you are someone who is knowledgeable in that domain, a satellite image is not useful. Say I give you a 6-band satellite image. What is a average Joe, a common person, going to do with that? Not much. But someone with domain knowledge who's studied that data for a long time, such as an agronomist or a scientist, can give you great insights from those same pixels. But we can't take every plot's image and show that to scientists because there's way too many farmers and nearly not as many scientists. So over there comes artificial intelligence. If we can train the AI, artificial intelligence, the kind of intelligence that exists in our agronomists, that exists in our scientists, who are capable of understanding this remote sensing data, and त्या माहितीला आपण किंवा त्या बुद्धिमत्तेला आपण एका मॉडेलमध्ये जर उतरून घेऊ शकतो, if we can replicate that intelligence artificially, then one AI system can do millions of farm plot analysis. And with the help of that, we can then give intelligence rather than just data. So that is the purpose of combining artificial intelligence with remote sensing, which is something that you must have heard quite a lot. I'm definitely not the first person who is introducing you to that topic. And that is why remote sensing is complementary to artificial intelligence. They go both hand in hand, and they are very, extremely useful together. Like I mentioned, there are different kinds of remote sensing. One can, अगर image ही लेना है, तो सैटेलाइट से हम images लेते हैं. उसके अलावा हम, drones में भी there are different kinds of drones that can be utilized. Even a CCTV camera can give you remote sensing data that can be useful. And in a lot of the poly houses, you can see that happening. It's not a moving camera. It's a stationary camera that gives you a time lapse, an image every short interval of time. And that image can be analyzed. And even a CCTV camera can be a remote sensing tool. Or you can see a human over here. We thought, why not bring it to a human level where human who has his innate intelligence can be clubbed with AI with the help of such tools, so that superhuman capabilities, that no matter how much you train a human being, they cannot capture data in the electromagnetic spectrum with their naked eye. So there is a need for a tool that can help them see what is invisible to their eye. And that form of remote sensing clubbed with AI can give very interesting results. And we believe that when I say we, me and my startup and the people that I work with, believe that that level of intelligence can be very useful and very complementary to broader scope remote sensing. Because in a pixel of a satellite image, I may not get all of the data that is necessary for a particular plot. But if I have ground truthing, which is if I have been to that farm and I have clicked pictures or I have used sensors to gather data, then I can use that to ground truth the satellite imagery data, which is low in temporal as well as spatial resolution. And that can give me much more improved results, because then I'm combining coarse data, broad scope data, with very fine data from individual plants or individual leaves. And that is where a concept that we worked on was humanistic intelligence. Chordia sir earlier mentioned about nature's intelligence. We are a part of nature, which is why we've been able to do, it's not like without this data or without this information or without these tools, we weren't able to do agriculture well. We've been able to do that well because there's an innate human intelligence that we have. But like I mentioned, there are certain things that human beings can do that can't be done by machines. And there are certain things that machines can do that can't be done by humans. And if we club those two, if we think about it as a combined system where I'm not a separate entity from the machine is an integral part of me, like a mobile phone. This is not a separate entity anymore. It's with me all the time. So Google is with me all the time, for example. I have got superhuman capabilities as compared to, say, 30 years ago. So we are already well integrated with technology, and we thought, why can't we take it even further close to us? And that is where my research at the University of Toronto with Professor Steve Mann came into being. He's known as the father of wearable computing. And we thought that a human system along with a machine system can do two things. One is sensing. A human being senses things with our organs. I can see things with my eyes. I can hear things with my ears. I can smell things with my nose. Those are my senses. At the same time, a system, after gathering information about the environment, also wishes to change the environment, impact the environment, affect the environment in different ways. That we think of as actuation. As a human being, a way of actuation that I have is my hands. I can change the environment around me with the help of my hands. I'm changing the environment right now by speaking to you, by producing sound, which is a way of actuation, right? I'm able to share my information, change the environment such that that same information is being, perceived by you all. That is a kind of effect or that I have. My hands are a way of moving things. That is also a kind of actuation. Similarly, machines have sensors. The electromagnetic spectrum that I mentioned, even though human eye can't see certain parts of it, we can develop sensors that can see parts of it. So sensors can be better than human beings in certain ways. I cannot look at infrared, but a sensor can look at it. Or I cannot look at extreme brightness, but a sensor can look at it. At the same time, the kind of resolution that my eyes have, we don't have cameras that would be able to replicate that kind of image quality. When you think about eyes, if you think about the image quality that is being produced, is much better than any sensor that's available in the market. So the idea of humanistic intelligence is to utilize human capabilities where humans are better than machines, and utilize machine capabilities where machines are better than human beings, and together create a humanistic intelligence system where human intelligence is an integral part of the machine, which sort of creates a cyborg out of us, a half human, half machine sort of a thing. And my professor actually is known as the world's first cyborg, so someone who has integrated things into their body. And it is not just science fiction anymore. You can see Elon Musk coming up with brain computer interfaces. I believe the founder of Zomato has also started something where they are working with brain waves. So we've got technology integrated all the way into our bodies at this point. So this is something that was started in the 70s, but has seen a significant change today and significant possibilities today, where machines can be made an integral part of our human body. Why am I speaking to you about this? Because I too have some expertise in sensing. This humanistic intelligence thing or remote sensing bit, I've done some research in it. And with the help of that, I've been able to make my little contribution to that domain. And I'd like to speak to you about that. Like I mentioned, remote sensing, electromagnetic spectrum, ये सारी चीज़ें गूगल पे दिख सकती है. बट मेरा जो कोर एक्सपर्टीज है, जो कोर एक्सपीरियंस है, वो मैं आपको शेयर करना चाहता हूँ. तो one thing that and I will of course link all of this to agriculture and what we do today. When we think of remote sensing, I mentioned pixels. And for the longest time, we as human beings were trying to increase the number of pixels. Our belief was that अगर मुझको ज़्यादा pixel दिखेंगे, मतलब in very simple language, if I'm able to zoom more, I'd be able to collect more data. But when you think about it, are more pixels necessarily better quality? Not always. On the screen, you see, and on the right side of the screen, you see 3 images. That's an image of welding being done. The topmost image, you see complete white spot where the welding is happening. In the bottom image, you see details of the welding tip, but everything else is dark. तो इसमें मैंने कितने भी पिक्सल ऐड किए, तो भी ब्लैक तो ब्लैक ही रहेगा. If my sensor is unable to capture that part of the data, I'm getting no information. Even if I add millions of additional pixels, it is giving me no additional information. But when you look at it, that same sensor, same camera से हमने top का image भी लिया है और bottom का भी image लिया है. It does have a certain capability. The way in which we traditionally think about images, it is unable to capture that. But when I change the settings, I'm able to get good data from both the extreme bright regions and the extremely dark regions. And that is where we worked on this technology called high dynamic range imaging, HDR. And you all have experienced it actually. It exists in your cell phone's camera. You might have seen the HDR button. That was invented by Steve Mann. And this is an extreme example of that, where HDR is being used to visualize welding very clearly. In your daily life, you must have experienced HDR where when you try to take an image with the sunset, a selfie with the sunset, when I tap on my face, I get details of the face, but the sunset goes completely white. If I tap on the sunset, I get beautiful colors of the sunset, but my face goes completely dark. But these days, when you click the same image from the HDR mode, some people also label it as night mode, you get details both in the face as well as the sunset. So with that same sensor, you have increased its capacity to capture real information from the ground. And we are doing the same things with remote sensing. Just more resolution in satellite imagery is not useful if the data that is coming from it per pixel is not of the highest quality. A very simple example of that is a satellite is in the space, right? During the monsoon season, we have tremendous amounts of clouds. So in satellite imagery during that period, all we see is clouds in the image. So no amount of pixels or resolution is going to help me get ground data from there. But that same thing, same parcel of land, when looked at through SAR imagery, you're able to penetrate through the clouds and get certain data. So being able to combine different things where they complement each other such that per pixel you're able to capture maximum amount of truth or maximum amount of real data, real information that's there, your sensing mechanism becomes much better. So before we go into what kind of sensors or how to make a sensor best or trying to increase the resolution, because a lot of people must have experienced the resolution thing, इतना मेगापिक्सल, आजकल हर कैमरा को मेगापिक्सल से मार्केट करते हैं कि इसमें इतना ज्यादा मेगापिक्सल है, 100 मेगापिक्सल, 200 मेगापिक्सल. हमने सोचा कि भले ही 100 मेगापिक्सल हो या 10 मेगापिक्सल हो, अगर हर एक पिक्सल में से मुझको बेस्ट अमाउंट ऑफ रियल इंफॉर्मेशन दैट एग्जिस्ट ऑन ग्राउंड कैप्चर कर पाए, तो मेरा 10 मेगापिक्सल कैमरा भी 100 मेगापिक्सल कैमरा को बीट करता है. एंड दैट वाज द अटेम्प्ट ओवर हियर. My contribution to this is the fact that in your cell phone's camera, you might have seen HDR only in still image mode, not in video mode. So that was my contribution, and I have a patent in that. And with that, we are able to capture more information from the same sensors that exist, whether it's in satellite imagery, whether it is in drones, or whether it is handheld devices. So this was one way of contributing to remote sensing that is practically being used today. In the more traditional sense, you must have seen data fusion in remote sensing or data fusion in satellite imagery, where data from different cameras that are able to capture different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum are fused together. And with the help of that, you get something that is a composite image, which has information from infrared, information from ultraviolet, and information from the visible spectrum all integrated into one. And that's the kind of data fusion that we work and we also apply in agriculture. This is a short video of it, but I believe it will open YouTube. So I will just skip that. If anybody would like to see the video, I can share it later. Like I mentioned, sensing is not limited to visual data. There's a lot of information that is around us that is not in the visual format, but it has a lot of meaning to it. One of those things is sound. You can go and record sounds, and that can give you a lot of information. And that too is a kind of remote sensing, where you're sensing remotely the audio spectrum that is there in the environment. And over here on the screen, you see something that we did in that domain, but again, slightly different from what you'd imagine a microphone to capture. Over here, we've shown detection of hidden sound waves in extremely high frequencies that are again not audible to our ears, human ears. And the regular microphones that we design, like this microphone, are all tuned or rather designed for listening to the audible spectrum, things that human beings can hear. But at the same time, you've got infrasonic and ultrasonic sounds that are not audible to our human ears and hence often or almost all the times not audible to our regular microphones, but that can give us great information. Over here you see a soft toy. In that soft toy is a hidden microphone that is listening to a 40 kilohertz frequency that is not audible to our human ears. And my contribution over here was designing this watch-like device that helps you visualize that exact wave in physical space. So with that, we were able to detect various sensors or transmitters that were transmitting or receiving information in the audio domain, but not in the human audible space. How we are using, and this was a technology that received a lot of appreciation actually. That is where I was able to contribute to the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2016 in the discovery of gravitational waves, because those two are a kind of waves. When I say sound waves, what is it exactly? It is particles vibrating. Particles can be thought of in various scales. We typically think about it from an audio space where I'm speaking and the air is moving, because of which audio waves are created and those are captured or transmitted. But that same kind of vibration can happen at a galactic scale as well, where there are vibrations that are caused due to gravitational waves, and we help detect that. So the reason for saying this is that these physical waves can be detected in various formats, whether for gravitational waves, whether for our regular audio, or in the ultrasonic domain. The ultrasonic domain is particularly useful for us in agriculture because one of the key issues in agriculture is pest management. And these pests make various sounds that are not audible to us. We hear crickets, we hear different kinds of insects, but in reality, insects are creating way more sound. It's just that it's not audible to our human ears. And those sounds can give us great amount of information, whether that pest exists in your environment, how many such pests exist in your environment. So you can determine ETL, economic threshold level of pest infestation, by knowing how many pests are there, not by looking at them, but by listening to them in the ultrasonic domain. Similarly, in the ultrasonic domain, the insects also make mating sounds. So you can know whether an insect exists, how many of them exist, whether it is male or female, what direction they are moving in, and to what severity or what stage of growth they are in. So I can capture almost all of the information about a pest that is helpful for agricultural decision making by just listening to them outside of the audio domain. And that is what we are currently doing. And one limited success, because this is a domain that is where a lot of research is happening. One small success that we were able to achieve in this was being able to detect fruit fly अंडरग्राउंड बिकॉज ज्या लोकांनी फळमाशी बरोबर डील केलेलं आहे त्यांचं घरटं जे आहे उनका जो नेस्ट होता है दैट इज अंडरग्राउंड ऑफन एंड इफ यू आर एबल टू लिसन टू देम you don't have to wait for them to become flying creatures and start infestation. So this sort of an approach is really helping us detect things that earlier were very difficult to detect or perceive. Like I mentioned, our contribution in this domain, I always like to talk of things where I have contributed something. Otherwise, why am I talking to you? ऐसे ही expert बोल के कुछ भी बोलने में कोई अर्थ नहीं है unless I have actually contributed to the thing. So in this, like I mentioned, the gravitational wave discovery also utilized the same principle. So, you're able to apply the same fundamental physics principles at different scales. एक जगह पे हम gravitational wave detect कर रहे हैं, दूसरे में हम insect mate कर रहे हैं कि नहीं, या are they trying to mate, are they making mating sounds? We are able to detect that. And this detection we did in various domains. This is Steve, my research supervisor, great guy. And over here we did detection of waves with motion sensors, जिससे automatically आपका door open या close होता है. So you can also visualize those waves actually, and that can give you a lot of information about the environment. And in the agriculture domain, pests is a space where that can be utilized. At the same time, you are also able to detect any defects in a fruit that exists inside. And this is something that we are actively doing research on. One of the key issues in mango export is spongy tissue, which unless you cut the mango, there is no way of detecting it. There have been X-ray scan attempts of detecting it, and that is doable, but that's a very invasive way of detecting any living tissue. So over there, we are trying to see if we can use ultrasonic waves or if we can use the audio domain to create certain sounds and look at the reflection that's coming from them. because a mango without spongy tissue makes different reflective sound when compared to a mango with spongy tissue. So that way we can use this sort of a different kind of remote sensing for fruit segregation or fruit grading. This is us doing it the same thing in different domains. This is our lab in California. Now, when we looked at sensors and how they can be made better, पहले सेंसर को तो बेटर बनाए, फिर उसको कहाँ कहाँ पे लेके जाएंगे, सैटेलाइट में लेके जाएंगे, ड्रोन में लेके जाएंगे. वैसे ही हमने सोचा कि उस सेंसर को why don't I bring it very close to my body, right? Why don't I integrate it with my human body in a way where true humanistic intelligence can come into being? And that's why we created these glasses. This is the world's first open source augmented reality headset, in which I have a camera that is sensing things that are not visible to my naked eye. I have a display over here that is showing me what that sensor is seeing, so that in real time, I'm able to see the things that were earlier not visible to my naked eye. So that would be infrared images, ultraviolet images, images in different bands. When I say infrared and ultraviolet, there's many bands that come in between that. So you're able to capture information that was earlier not visible to my naked eye and overlay it in real time in front of me. And we also have a processor over here, with the help of which that same information that was earlier not visible to my naked eye, as well as information that is visible to my naked eye, can be processed so that I'm not just seeing the data, but I'm actually seeing intelligence in there. I'm actually getting insights rather than data. So we created this system with the help of which we were truly able to take technology on the ground. And this is again something that we are using in agriculture, and that is what my company does actually, creating wearable computing based plant phenotyping systems that are able to give us biotic and abiotic stress information about plants or produce, that gives us insights that were earlier not known to us, or were not, we weren't able to perceive that information or that data. One of the things that we did was the infrared spectrum imaging. So over here, you see a kettle in which there's boiling water. And as you can see to my naked eye, it looks like a regular kettle, right? Silver in color on the outside. But in the infrared spectrum, I'm able to see where it is hot, where it is not so hot, what is the efficiency of its heating. And basically what I'm trying to show you is that you see things that you earlier weren't able to see, and this is a live view from that device that we created. We then also expanded this. This previous project is where we were able to publish a lot of papers actually, and that is where my entrepreneurial journey also started, because this was a device that caught attention of a lot of people at that point of time, which is in 2016-17. Over 1 million people saw this technology on a website called Instructables, if you've heard of it. And they replicated that technology and added their own contributions to it, because it was an open source technology. And I used the same principle that I had of looking at things not just from a visual domain, but also from an audio domain. But this time, instead of sensing, we looked at it from an actuation perspective. Can you imagine what a visually impaired farmer would be, how a visually impaired farmer would be doing farming? There is no way for them to actually see the things. तो हम जो सारा remote sensing बोल रहे हैं, वो एक visually impaired इंसान के लिए तो कुछ exist ही नहीं करता. And that was one of the questions that used to come regarding this device. A very simple question. People with glasses used to ask me कि भाई मैं चश्मा पहनता हूँ तो मैं ये कैसे पहनूंगा, दो चश्मा कैसे पहनूंगा? तो उसका तो solution बहुत simple है. In front of your lens, you add a optical lens with which you are getting the image correction or the optical correction that you need for clear vision. So that was a simple solution. बस इसमें lens add करना है. But that got us to think कि what does a blind person, is augmented reality not meant for visually impaired people, or is sensing not meant for visually impaired people? Just because they are unable to see an image, does that mean that the insights from that image are not perceivable by them? The answer was no. And that's when we came up with this device. We called it VR Sight. And in that, we use this technology to give information about our environment to visually impaired people. And taking this to farming, I hope to see this one day where I can see a completely visually impaired individual do farming with the help of tools just like any other person would be able to. Why should we be limited due to natural reasons when we are talking about gaining superhuman capabilities? So, looking at the entire spectrum from people like us who are privileged with all of our senses, but also taking into consideration accessibility of that technology. And in this project, we actually won an award from the Honorable President of India for this. And we are trying to see how we can look at accessibility in farming as well. That was my experience as a researcher. After doing my research at the University of Toronto and Stanford University, I then thought that, okay, iska kuch करना चाहिए. Where does agriculture come into being? I showed you welding, I showed you electromagnetic waves, I showed you gravitational waves. But how did that come into agriculture? Is through InnoSapien. I founded this company in 2017 with the objective of utilizing these technologies so that intelligence can be brought right on the farmer's field. And earlier I mentioned that one of the key things that we focused on was plant phenotyping. There are two well-established plant phenotyping facilities known to me in India. One is at IRI, Nanaji Deshmukh Plant Phenomics Center, and the other is at Niazam Baramati, the National Institute of Abiotic Stress Management. And what does plant phenotyping say? Or what is the fundamental principle of plant phenotyping? Looking at plants through sensors where we get to know about their biotic and abiotic stresses. And by looking at plants, I mean visual spectrum and beyond. We look at plants with various sensors and we look at how the plants are responding to light with those sensors. This is particularly in the visual domain, but like I mentioned, in the audio domain also, we're trying to integrate various tools. So plant phenotyping isn't something that I invented. It is a well-known science for which tens of crores are spent to create large facilities. The Nanaji Deshmukh Plant Phenomics Center at IRI costed, I believe, about 70 crores to set up. It's a large facility. So it's a well-established science. But it was limited to IRI only. And it was limited to the plants that were placed in pots that moved around in a conveyor belt. So that was a great technology capable of detecting pests, diseases, and deficiencies in crops 10 to 15 days prior to any visible damage to the crops. Similar to how we were doing corona screening for human beings, to give you an analogy. We were using, thermal screening to do a quick screening of coronavirus in human beings. So something like that can be done for plants as well, where we can detect the stresses and get a screening or an early warning of various issues that aren't to a scale where it is visibly, the damage is visible to our eye. What we did is we used that technology, which requires an imaging facility as big as this hall, or actually, I think it's almost twice the size of this hall, these plant phenotyping facilities. But with the help of our wearable computing expertise, we were able to make it miniature. As you saw earlier, we were already we were innovating at the sensor front and making it miniature so that it would even fit on on eyeglasses. So we knew how to make things small and wearable. So we said, well, the plant phenotyping maybe to same hi cheez ho raha hai. Same type of imaging ho raha hai, but with large sensors, why don't we miniaturize that and make it in a wearable form? So that plant phenotyping technology can reach the farms, so that plants don't have to be in pots in conveyor belts to make the best use of that technology. So plant phenotyping ko field pe to leke gaye, but that is not where it ends, because to understand the information from a plant phenotyping data set, you need a extremely expert scientist. There are only a handful of people who are experts in this domain in India. One of them is Dr. Vishwanathan Chinnuswamy, my mentor and my advisor at InnoSapien, who leads the plant phenotyping facility at IRI. But I can't take Chinnuswamy and give him all the data that we are collecting. That intelligence has to be brought on the ground. And that's where we utilized AI to then infer information from that data so that real time insights can be given to farmers. These are the various advantages, but we've already spoken about that. This is a practical example of it being used on field. Over here, with the naked eye, you see two bunches of grapes. These bunches of grapes, of course, in size, visually, I'm able to tell there's a difference. But if I were to export these grapes, I need one more layer of information. That is the Brix value. How much sucrose content is there in these grapes? Because if it's not in a particular range, if the sucrose value or the Brix value of my lot of grapes is not in a particular range, it gets rejected in export. And that is a kind of insight for which we have refractometers, a Brix meter. But that is an invasive technology because in that, refractometer is basically a kind of, a telescopic device in which you puncture the grape, put the juice of the grape in that, and get information, get to know what is the sucrose level. But मैं कितने grapes को puncture कर सकता हूँ? सारे grapes को तो puncture कर दिया तो खाने के लिए क्या दूंगा? तो सारों को तो मैं puncture कर नहीं सकता. Even in terms of scale, it is not doable. So you randomly sample. But what we did is we combined that with our imaging technology to train the models to be able to detect the Brix value. So all of the grapes on the right side that you see in blue, that is the bright blue, are the ones that are in the export acceptable Brix range. So with this, I can do smart harvesting in the farm. Not only can I use technology to, typically we hear more yield, less cost of production, but with the same amount of yield, you can get access to better markets. For example, in grapes, it is the export market. In turmeric, it is access to the pharma market, nutraceutical market, where curcumin matters, not just the volume of turmeric. So with that same produce, how can I help the farmers get more income? Because at the end of the day, farmer को ऐसी चीज से पड़ी है कि मुझको पैसा कितना मिल रहा है. Fundamental question. So to tackle that, this sort of a technological intervention helps you then increase the export percentage in the grapes that you harvest, and basis that you're able to increase the income of farmers almost by 50% just by a simple intervention of whether it is exportable or not. Of course, Brix is just one parameter. There are various other parameters like residue levels, but those two we have integrated. So our approach in agriculture, InnoSapiens' approach in agriculture, is to help farmers access better markets with the help of technological intervention. In grapes, like I mentioned, export, green chili, what Sarangi sir mentioned, is also an export-oriented project, because of which farmers were able to realize over 160% increase in income, which is definitely doing the doubling farmers' income goal just by doing price realization by export enablement. मैं खुद मी स्वतः एक मिरचीचा शेतकरी आहे. वाडा तालुक्यामध्ये माझं शेत आहे आणि त्याच्यामध्ये मला आता 2 आठवडे आधी बिफोर दिस होल मिडल ईस्ट कनंड्रम I was able to get 108 rupees per kg rate for my green chili, when in the domestic market that same day the rate was 48. So a significant change in price realization with the same tonnage. माझी मिरची तरी पण त्या तोड्यामध्ये 1.5 टनच होती, पण त्या 1.5 टनातून मी डबल इन्कम मिळवला कारण की I was able to export that. So that is one of our key objectives, enablement of better markets for farmers. And in that, we utilize remote sensing as well. So it's not like we use just our sensors. We combine it in a thing that is now a buzzword these days, multimodal artificial intelligence, where we utilize 5 kinds of inputs. One is remote sensing data, that is satellite imagery data. One is the weather data, which, we already have weather stations that give us that data. There's a human being, agricultural scout, who actually goes with our sensors in the field and gathers data. These sensors with which we are able to gather the data, and we also use IoT devices to get soil data, such as soil moisture, soil pH, and luminosity, how much sunlight is falling on that parcel of land, with IoT based sensors that stay in the ground. So, with these 5 inputs, our AI is able to come up with multimodal intelligence through which we are able to give insights to farmers. And this we deploy in a collaborative approach. This slide is particularly important for something like MCCIA because that is what MCCIA also tries to do, bring various stakeholders together. We have people from different domains over here. So how is a technology useful to all the stakeholders, or how can all the stakeholders be involved in the technological development is something that we looked at. One thing is international collaborations, trying to bring the best packages of practice into the farming, where we've worked with various organizations such as KVK Baramati, like sir mentioned. Even the sugarcane project over there is something that we initially worked on significantly all the way from 2018 to 2024, and that led to great results. And in vegetable domain, the Dutch packages of practice and the kind of farming that they do is really helping us improve practices over here. So improving on the package of practice. We also work with various academic institutions, Mahatma Phule Krishi Vidyapit and IRI being the key organizations, also Konkan Krishi Vidyapit Dapoli, where we are able to get research knowledge which already existed. ऐसा नहीं है कि साइंटिस्ट पहले फोटो नहीं खींच रहे थे, वो रिसर्च पेपर पब्लिश करने के लिए फोटो तो खींच रहे थे, बट वो सिर्फ 10 फोटो खींच रहे थे किसी इंसेक्ट के, ताकि रिसर्च पेपर पब्लिश हो सके. हमने उनके साथ में काम किया ताकि वो 10 फोटोज के बदले में 10,000 फोटोज खींचे, so that AI can be trained on it. Because we as a startup don't have the resources to be able to do such experiments and gather so much data. So over there we utilize partners such as academic institutions to get access to various experimental settings where data could be collected. At the same time, we also work with local government agencies such as KVKs and agriculture research stations in various districts. And in that, we've been able to do various thought leadership and work on various projects with various organizations. So the work on grapes was initially done with National Research Center for Grapes as well as MPKV Rahuri. And beyond that, we then started to work with farmers from the Maharashtra Rajya Draksha Bagaidar Sangh, MRDBS. And we've worked on this in various domains, all the way from grain rotting detection and grain infestation detection to citrus. So trying to use the same technology in various broad scopes of agriculture. Apart from that, the key stakeholder in all of this is farmers. So right from day one, we've tried to have a farmer-centric approach, even in development of technology. So before I actually went to MPKV Rahuri, I met with various farmers in Palghar district, progressive farmers such as Mr. Ramchandra Save, who's a large-scale capsicum cultivator who has now moved on to orchids actually. So he's someone who sees farming with a lens that is, I would say, almost 10 to 20 years ahead of its time. So people like that, pioneering farmers, have given us information on what needs to be developed. Often what happens is research goes on and there's so many problems to solve in research. But for a farmer, not all of those problems need to be solved immediately. There are key economic drivers is what we have identified. That if you're able to target, say, only 2 pests and 2 diseases in a particular crop, which are key economic drivers, you are still able to significantly improve the possibility of success for those farmers because उन 4 चीजों से ही ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम आ रही है. तो मुझको 20 पेस्ट और जितने भी पॉसिबल डिसीज उनको सॉल्व करने की जरूरत नहीं. So we worked with various pharma organizations. We love working with pharma producer organizations, and with that we gain a lot of information, and that also brings the whole humanistic intelligence part into it, where we are not relying just on sensor data for AI based insights. We are clubbing that with traditional knowledge that exists. So I'm not just trying to replicate the intelligence of a scientist at a university, but I'm also trying to replicate the intelligence of Mr. Ramchandra Save, who's got 52 years of farming experience and who has literally led a transformation in the chili and capsicum cultivation in Palghar district and created a hub out of it. That too, all of that work starting in the 1980s when they first introduced shade net. So that kind of knowledge and experience cannot be replicated in a lab or in a university. So we try to do that as well, especially in terms of packages of practice and experimental research. These are the various farmer organizations that we work with. This is Mr. Save's nephew, Prasad Save. This is their orchid farm. So like I mentioned, they are moving ahead with time. You know, we think about climate change and how that can be tackled, but this guy's already done it. He's already doing soilless cultivation of orchids and has almost, negated all of the import of orchids that was happening from Thailand into the Mumbai region. The entire market is captured by these guys. So they are moving ahead with time, and things that we discuss conceptually, he has already built 15 acres of it. So the kind of insights that someone like that can give is extremely valuable in artificial intelligence development. These are various other farmers and our consultative process with the farmers. And I also know I am a little short on time. I give lecture modules on this in universities, at the University of Toronto. I've also done this at the Oxford University. So I can speak on this topic for hours, but I'm trying to condense it in some time. So I'll skip through a little bit of it and take you to a practical example, something that Sarangi sir also mentioned and Rashmi madam also mentioned. Our project in green chili that was done in Palghar. And mind you, it was done with all farmers being tribal and smallholder. So it was a particular group of farmers that needed a intervention. I can go to a grape farmer and talk about technological interventions, and they mostly laugh at me because they are so rich and powerful and progressive that उन्होंने almost सारी चीजें already देखी हुई है. तो over there, as a company, we thought that we can only do a small incremental change, but something that is dramatic we were able to do in Palghar, where we were able to export chili that was cultivated by tribal farmers. Farmers who are traditionally looked at as the bottom of the pyramid when we think about technological adoption. So हमने सोचा कि impact create करते ताकि लोग उसको देखने आए, और उसी वजह से FAO जैसे organizations आके हमारा काम देख के गए, because it's not just the technological intervention, it is who that technological intervention is for that also makes it extremely valuable to us. So this is a dashboard of our project. There were 250 farmers in this project. And over here, you can see a satellite image, geographic information system for anybody who knows the technical terms. And you can see that all of the farmers' plots have been plotted. I'll just take a couple more minutes. So all of the farmers' fields were digitized, and we collected historical data from those farms, loaded it into the system, and with that, we were able to give information for every individual farmer on what actually exists on the field. We also did the soil test, water test, and leaf petiole test to give us ground information. You don't need a sensor. A traditional soil test, I don't think, would be replaced by sensing technology or remotely sense technology for the next little while. So we have to stick to traditional testing. So we did traditional testing of soil, water, and leaf petiole to get basal data, basal information, because until you build a stack of data in terms of timeline also and in terms of various components, you're unable to make smart decisions. So a soil test was done. And this is the key part where AI has come into play. Like I mentioned, we don't believe in solving all of the problems of every farm. We looked at the key economic drivers. That is, in green chili in Palghar district, it was black thrips that causes severe damage to chili production. We looked at water stress, which can determine the quality of the chili, which is a bottleneck for export enablement. And we also looked at the leaf curl virus, which also leads to severe losses. सिर्फ इन 3 चीजों पे हमने फोकस करके ये प्रोजेक्ट किया, ताकि एक फोकस्ड मैनर में, I don't like to think of AI that is like a magic wand that would solve everything and anything. It has to be trained in a particular way because of the various variability. So we did that, and we created these susceptibility indices in which every farmer for each one of these issues was put into 6 categories, going all the way from very low intensity to extreme intensity. 6 categories we divided them into. And basis the ground data and basis our multimodal AI system, every farmer was distributed into these categories, and basis those categories, they were given farm specific advice. ये category करने का भी एक reason है, not to give the farmers information directly through an app, but through categorization, so that it can be translated into trainings in farmer field schools. Because ट्राइबल डिस्ट्रिक्ट है पालघर, जहाँ पे इंटरनेट अवेलेबिलिटी नहीं है और स्मार्टफोन अवेलेबिलिटी भी नहीं है. तो टू टैकल दैट, अ फार्मर फील्ड स्कूल अप्रोच, सो ट्रेडिशनल विथ advanced technologies had to be done for effective implementation. And through this project, we were able to increase the yield by 61%. We were able to reduce the cost of cultivation by 15%. We were able to reduce the use of pesticide, so chemical footprint, by 21%, and increase the income per kilo by export enablement by 83%. That led to a total of 165% aggregated increase in income of the farmers. And I'm very thankful to NABARD, one, for funding the project, but more importantly, पैसा तो कहीं से भी आ सकता है, but they really gave us insights and experience through this pilot project on how to quantify all of this data, how to maintain records of it, and also how to present it so that it can be a bankable success story. Not just a success story, but a bankable success story that is scientifically validated. So that is where NABARD really helped us understand how to go from doing experiments to running a business, because that is where organizations such as NABARD can really help us. And this is the data that went into it. Over here, you see 2 flowers. The one on left has got black thrips sucking already happening, and on the right, there is no black thrips sucking. And when you look at both of them in naked eye, they look like healthy flowers to you. So with this, we were able to do black thrips detection early in time, and basis that recommend solutions that would help control it effectively. And then I'll just take one last minute. One of the key successes of this project wasn't just the feedback that we received from farmers and the fact that farmers were able to export their chili, but farmers from Pune district, Yedgaon Parisar, near Junnar, came and visited these farmers. Path Sanstha, a local credit union from Yedgaon, visited farmers, tribal farmers in Palghar, to study what their intervention was, and have now vowed to scale this project in their region also. So this inversion from progressive farmers coming and visiting tribal farmers, underprivileged farmers, to see what intervention that they have done, is a true success indicator for us, because otherwise we don't see that flow of visits happening. Typically, you've got tribal and smallholder farmers going to progressive farmers. यहाँ पे उल्टा हो गया. So that's a great testament for our success that goes much beyond any of these other, accomplishments that we were able to obtain. And with that, I'm low on time, so going forward is just our success and what sort of traction we were able to build. And I will stop my presentation over here. If anybody has any questions, then they can definitely reach out to me. Or, I don't know how the question answer session is happening, but these are my contact details. If anybody would like to ask any questions, I'm available at any time. Thank you so much.
So please, kindly wait here. Sarangi sir, may I please request you to felicitate our young speaker here, Nirkar sir, please. Stage var yeta, sir. I can go there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, you can go down. Yeah.